Peace be with you, mortal. Who I am is not important. I am merely a servant sent to deliver a message. I will tell you a parable of the incompetent servant. Now listen closely to my words, as they contain an important message the Most High has for you. There was a servant who worked for a master who cared deeply about doing a good job. But it seemed as though the servant kept making mistakes. First, he was placed to work in the kitchen to cook but burnt the food. So the master annoyingly told him to work in the field. While in the field, he failed to plant the seeds correctly and was unable to remove the weeds or properly gather the finished crops. The master began to grow even more irritated, thinking to himself if there was anything the servant could do without messing it up. The master put the servant in charge of watching the children, but they were out of control, and the servant failed to adequately manage the situation. Then he gave the servant the task of repairing the fence, but he only ended up making the damage worse. Furious, the master called the servant incompetent and took him to the market to sell him to another. While there, he sold him for cheap to a man for a fraction of what it cost him originally. Excited to have a great deal, the man took the servant back with him but ran into the same issue as the first master. He gave the servant different tasks to complete, and when the servant failed at accomplishing the task, the man became frustrated and called the servant incompetent. This continued for a little while until the man became fed up and went back to the market to find the first master who sold the servant to him. "Why didn't you tell me this servant was completely incompetent when you sold him to me?" the man shouted. "Surely you had to know there was something amiss with the price I sold him to you for," the man replied. Frustrated, the man returned to the servant and told him that since he could do nothing right, that it would be best for him to just leave. So he sent the servant away. Broken and downcast, the servant walked the streets without a place to sleep and was forced to beg for scraps. One day the king was passing by in his royal carriage on his way back to the castle, humming one of his favorite hymns. Overhearing the king's humming, the servant began to hum and sing along. The king noticed and stopped the carriage to ask who it was that was humming and singing along. The servant reluctantly acknowledged that it was him, and the king questioned where he had learned that particular song, because it had been one that the king learned from his mother during his childhood and had not heard anyone else sing it. The servant replied, "I too learned it from my mother during my childhood." The king was shocked, but felt a sense of connection to the servant despite the man's circumstances. "Come with me to the palace. I am sure I can find some work for you to do," the king said with a welcoming smile. The servant, unsure of the king's intentions, boarded the carriage and went back to the palace with him. At the palace, the king ordered that the man be bathed and given new clothing. The next day, the king sent his advisors to question the man to find out what he was good at to be of service to the king. The advisors questioned many things of the servant, such as, can you cook or clean? Can you sow or reap? Can you build or plant? Yet every time the servant responded with the same answer, that he had tried these things in the past but has failed at them miserably. The advisors returned to the king, saying that they all found him to be utterly incompetent, because there was nothing that he could do to be of service to the king. But this did not deter the king. Instead, he sent for the servant to stand before him in the throne room. As the servant appeared before him, the king asked, why couldn't his advisors find anything he could do? "Sire, I am an incompetent servant who has failed at so many things. I try my best, but it seems as though there isn't much I have been able to do with great skill in my servant's duties," he said with his head slightly lowered. The king then spent some time with the servant trying to figure out what he could do to be of service. Together they covered many different tasks, but to no avail. All of a sudden, the king remembered that the servant knew the childhood song. "Wait, that song, sing it again," the king commanded as he placed his hand on the servant's shoulder. The servant reluctantly complied. The servant began to hum the hymn and gradually elevated the hum to a slight whisper and eventually to full-fledged song. The king stopped the servant abruptly and commanded that the royal shior be brought to the throne room. Confused, the servant did not understand what was happening. As the members of the choir entered the throne room, the king began to clap his hands in excitement. What is he about to do? The servant thought to himself. The king lined the choir up and told them to play same hymn, instructing the servant to sing along as the lead. Embarrassed, the servant had never sung in front of so many before, but he did not want to disappoint the king. He has been so kind to me, I must not let him down, the servant thought to himself as he took in a deep breath. The choir began to hum the hymn in unison, and the servant, with some slight difficulty, managed to open his mouth and sing. His face turned red as the nerves seemed to escape through the droplets of sweat that began to run down his forehead. But the servant became more comfortable the more he sang. He could see the engagement of the king's facial expressions. Soon the servant was no longer nervous. He sang the entire song beautifully, and when he finished, the king gave the servant a standing ovation. "Wonderful, absolutely wonderful," the king applauded him. "Thank you, sire," the servant replied with a smile. "Who said you were completely incompetent?" the king sarcastically asked. The king ordered the entire royal court into the throne room. "From this day forward, this servant will serve me as the royal minister of music," the king exclaimed. Shock and awe erupted on the faces of those in the room, for they had heard rumors of the so-called incompetent servant from the king's advisors. But none more shocked than the servant himself. He could not believe it. I don't know what to say, sire. Thank you," the servant stuttered as he bowed his head in humility. "No need to thank me. I know you will serve me well," the king replied. The servant was elevated to a prominent position in the king's court and was given a servant of his own to assist him in his new duties as the minister of music. Later that evening in his royal quarters, the servant called for his servant to bring him some water. A young man entered into his chambers with a metal pitcher of water and a cup. He looked nervous and avoided direct eye contact. "Don't be nervous," the servant told him as he cautiously approached. All of a sudden, the young man stumbles and drops the entire pitcher of water onto the floor. Petrified, the young man scrambled to wipe up the water from the floor using a rag that was tucked into his waistband. The servant walked over to the young man and reached out his hand. The young man winced as if he was expecting the servant to strike him. "It's okay. It's just water," the servant said softly, reassuring him that there would be no consequences. Surprised, the young man took the servant's hand and stood to his feet. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. It won't happen again," the young man exclaimed with a false sense of confidence. This reminded the servant of the many times he said those same words to his previous masters before being scolded or sold himself. "Was this your first time bringing water?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the young man replied. "Then don't worry about it. Tell me, where did you serve before coming here?" the servant inquired. "I was a servant to a master on the outskirts of the kingdom, but I regrettably failed at accomplishing my tasks there, so the master called me incompetent and sold me to another. That master unfortunately did the same and sold me to someone here at the palace," he shamefully explained. Tears began to build up inside the corners of the servant's eyes. "Incompetent? No, you just haven't found your talent yet. Don't worry. We will find it together," he reassured him as swift trails of tears streamed down his cheeks. "How can someone be so kind?" the young man thought to himself as tears began to build in his eyes, as if they somehow were bridged from the servant's own face. The fourth servant picked up the pitcher of water and explained to the young man how he too was a servant and experienced similar treatment from his previous masters. He told him how he truly believed that he was incompetent, and that nothing good would ever come of him before the king found him on the road and had shown him kindness. "And now you are the royal minister of music for the entire kingdom," the young man shouted with a sense of pride. Yes, so just imagine what you can become, the servant reassured him. But just as the young man was about to reply with doubt, he noticed a stern look upon the servant's face and quickly readjusted his posture. Yes, I am excited to find out, the young man said, brushing off his clothes. How about we start right now? What do you say? The servant told him, placing his hand on the young man's shoulder. The servant smiled. It was a similar look the king had given him in the throne room. Thank you, sir, the young man murmured, wiping the tears from his eyes and nodding in agreement. The servant handed him the water pitcher and the young man cheerfully exited the room. We must pause and consider the message from this parable, Selah. I want you to remember that you were created by my master, the Most High Elohim of Israel, the creator of the universe. Never let anyone dictate what you feel about yourself or how you view your self-worth, because, as it has been written in the Psalms, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. In addition, do not be so quick to judge another's potential based on your one experience. They were also created by my master, and thus have a purpose on their lives as well. Encourage one another, support one another, and watch how your divine purpose manifests as it is revealed according to His will.